If you believe that God has called you into business ownership, you have to quit your job today and get into it. I used to work a very high-paying sales job. I had offers to go sell for companies at base salaries at over $400,000 per year. But I left that career and today own an artificial turf brand that we franchise nationally. Let me explain my thought a bit more here. When Jesus called the disciples to follow him, they dropped their nets immediately. They didn't have to go put together industry research. They didn't have to go ask around. They just obeyed. On the other hand, when Saul went out and he was called to annihilate all of his enemies, he hesitated. And what happened? He lost his kingdom because of it. So in my business, in the franchise business, I spend a lot of time talking with people who want to get into business ownership. And every now and then I will talk with a Christian guy who will tell me that God has called them into business ownership. So typically my response to this is, okay, how long have you been thinking about getting into business for yourself? A lot of times they'll tell me 1 to 2 years. And frankly, this response just drives me absolutely nuts, because if God called you to go do something, the only response should be obedience. You should quit your job today and start knocking on doors, building the business that God has told you to go build. But usually people don't want to go do that. They want more clarity before they step out. They want the path laid out in front of them so that they know they will be successful, and they will also know every step that it will take to be successful before they leave their job to get into the business that God has called them to go do. But the issue is I don't find anything like that, at least in scripture. And so take a look at the story of Jonah. So Jonah was called to go preach to a city where he knew that his preaching wouldn't be very effective. And so what did he do? He went and ran from it. He went to greener pastures. What ultimately happened was he was thrown off of a ship that he was on, and he ended up landing near the city that he was called to preach in. And I think many people will look at the story and they will say, oh gosh, how could he be so dumb? I would never do that. But for the person who wants to get into business, this is the modern day equivalent of God calling you to go start a business that sells CD-ROMs. Nobody would ever want to get into this business, and most of us would run far away from that. But yet we are called into obedience if it's something that we have been called to go do. Another story that comes to mind is Noah as he was building the ark. He didn't build the ark once he saw it started to get cloudy and once he started to feel rain in his bones. He built the ark for a generation before it ever flooded. And for me in our business, this is something that I very much feel right now. We have built this massive support team, and we are putting in a lot of infrastructure, knowing that in the future we will become the national artificial turf brand. But that's not the case today. And so for now, it's up for me to build it, knowing that whatever will come, we'll be prepared for. But if God has called you into business ownership, he doesn't need a 5-year plan. He doesn't need a SWOT analysis. He doesn't need all this industry research. He really doesn't need anything. But what he wants is your obedience to go do what he has called. And if all of this sounds a little bit extreme, maybe God didn't call you into business ownership. And that's okay, because the reality is that you could still be a business owner, even if God didn't call you to go do that. Maybe he hasn't called you to a career or business ownership and you just want to be a business owner. That's totally okay. But for those of you who were called into business ownership, I would urge you to take action on that. If you like this content, make sure to hit like and subscribe. We share content weekly.